Gospel from the Gutter, featuring Mike Smith. Every life worth living is a story worth telling. Born into chaos, Mike Smith, author of The Gutter Gospel, shares his personal memoir that speaks about addiction, mental health, desperation, and redemption. His mission is led to providing services and bringing awareness to military veterans. Based on his own memoir, I had a supportive wife, a new job, and a baby at home, yet the ache in my soul wouldn't go away. Mike joins this episode to share about his story, talk about some of the work he is doing, and how we can build better connections. Our guest on this episode is Mike Smith, who is the gritty, no-frills voice behind The Gutter Gospel, a raw and powerful memoir that dives headfirst into the trenches of addiction, redemption, and self-discovery. With unflinching honesty and a poet's soul, Mike captures the reality of life on the edge, offering readers both a cautionary tale and a story of hope. Mike Smith's story is one that truly resonates. As a former homeless veteran, he has faced unimaginable struggles, battling both mental illness and addiction. His memoir, The Gutter Gospel, is not just a recount of his life, it is a testament to resilience and the power of hope. Mike shares the raw truth of his experiences, giving voice to those who often go unheard. You can learn more about Mike by visiting his website at www.theguttergospel.com, and we'll have links to his book in the podcast notes.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Welcome to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, Mike Smith. Thanks for taking the time to join and talk.
Oh, you're very welcome, Andrew. I appreciate the time. So ready when you are to kind of dive into everything.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about The Gutter Gospel, Road to Redemption. And before we do, can you just give a little bit of a background to the listeners about you?
Sure. I was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and our family moved from there when I was 3 up to Sauk Center, Minnesota. This is going back quite a ways when I, from age 3 to 12, lived in Sauk Center. I don't know if people are aware that of the author Sinclair Lewis, but he was from there. And that was in central Minnesota. And then when I was 12 years old, my dad lost his job. He was a manager at the J.C. Penney chain, so they moved him around a lot. So we kind of had to make our friends, on the move all the time. So once we moved from Sauk Center up to a little town outside of Fargo called Barnesville, Minnesota, it's about a half hour down the highway from Fargo. I got into smoking pot and drinking at an early age when I was about 12 years old, right when we first moved there, hooked up with a guy that was my only friend in high school. And we would go out and have his older brother get us our supply of alcohol or weed. So that continued, after my dad died when I was 15. And then that escalated. My drug and alcohol use escalated severely after that. And I write about this in my book, but it was very tough on me because I'm a 2-time suicide survivor. And right after my dad passed away, that was my first suicide attempt about 6 months after he had passed. So coming from that background, it moved pretty quickly for me. I tried college for 1 year after high school and flunked out with really bad grades. I met up with a guy there that was supplying me with my marijuana. That was down in Fergus Falls Community College down the interstate. And long story short, after flunking out of college, then I had my student loans to pay, and I was pretty much stuck between a rock and a hard place because we were losing our clothing store and house to the bank back in Barnesville. My mom was trying to run it after my dad had passed away. So I joined the military. I went into the United States Air Force. My dad was an Air Force veteran. So I thought, well, to honor his memory, I'll do that and kind of, at least make it look somewhat respectable with the rest of my life. So I did that. And very shortly into my lifetime in the military, after basic training and my tech school was all in San Antonio, they stationed me in North Texas. So I never got out of the state of Texas. The old joke about the military is they have everybody fill out these things known as a dream sheet. And a joke, if you think anybody looks at your, and I never left the state of Texas, so it's obvious nobody looked at my dream sheet. But anyway, so with that being said, I fell into a group of guys in the permanent station up in Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls that also like to smoke marijuana. So we got into the old routine that I had known since growing up, and we were always kind of leery about people joining our group. And one time there was this one guy that we met just on that one occasion at a party that was joining in with us. And sure enough, the idiot wound up trying to bring a pot of marijuana on base and sold it to an undercover cop. And of course, once he got busted, he named names of everybody else that was using as well. So I got kicked out of the Air Force after just over 2 years of being in the military. And, it was a tough road because I had to move back to Fargo-Moorhead. Now I was really running out of options after, everything I'd gone through. And life got really hard for me. I wound up taking a job working construction because that's about the only thing I could find that would still offer me an opportunity looking at my records. So I had to work 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts. And was doing that. I had met up with Donnie at a bar one night, my guy that was my pot supplier in college, and we decided to rent a house together over by Moorhead State. And we were living there and growing high-grade marijuana to offset our rental income. So we were dealing marijuana. And we didn't get busted doing it, but something interfered with it. That was my first introduction into mania as far as being bipolar, because I wasn't diagnosed with being bipolar until many years later. But what happened, and I write about this on the sample chapters, this was my first encounter with something that was just supernatural and was not of this world. I saw my dad, who had been passed for 8 years already, appear to me in broad daylight. I was just on one of my odd off days that I actually got to have, trying to rest. And I was just sitting there watching TV, and this still quiet voice said, get up and stand in the middle of the room and fall back and I'll catch you. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd, but I'll give it a shot, So I did, and as soon as my rear end hit the floor, all of this really dark and heavy demonic stuff started hitting me from all sides. And it was my dad telling me, now that your life has come to an end and you're a worthless piece of this and that and the other thing, I'll spare the profanity here. But he was telling me, go grab the shotgun we used to pheasant hunt with, because I had that loaded since we were dealing drugs. And he goes, blow your head off, blow your effing head off. And I was looking outside, and there was all these cars driving by that were familiar to me from all of my time growing up. And they were all getting out of their cars, coming close to the house, saying, let's watch this worthless piece, SHIT, kill himself. And so I was just terrified. And fighting as good as I could. And it was like, I apologize. My dogs are getting a little riled up. But anyway, so I was sitting there in total fear, and this wind just kind of wound up running like 3.5 blocks away and just sweating profusely, terrified out of my mind and not knowing what was happening. And I was finally came to my senses and had to go back to the house. And I was there all alone, hearing these voices. And my uh, one friend that would come by regularly to smoke pot saw me in that state when I was in my just total fear state, and said, "Mike, what's wrong with you? You look like you saw a ghost," right? And I said, "I don't know, Heath, but here's what I will share with you. All I know is I can't get high. I feel like I need to go to church," is what my comment to him was. And this kind of all heads to the road to redemption in my life. And so I was sitting there telling him this, and he goes, "Mike, let me just be real honest with you. I didn't come here to get preached to. The only thing I came to do is to see if you want to get high today, just like always. And if you don't, I'll just leave and never come back." And that was the last I ever saw him in my life. So lost him as my friend. Donnie and I remained close. He joined my wedding party a few months after all this was taking place. I did wind up getting really involved in a fundamentalist Christian church up in North Moorhead, and met the lady that is now my wife for the past 36 plus years, and was with me during all those trials and tribulations in my life. And there were many. I had many manic breaks throughout the rest of my life. I write the second sample chapter that's on theguttergospel.com. You'll read in there how in 1999, for 3 days, I was in a padded cell in a straitjacket touring hell, or what it would be like to be forever condemned to hell. And I was sitting there in that state, like I mentioned. And once I came out of it, about 2-3 days later, this nurse came up to, I was in a regular room now in the hospital and not the padded cell. And she introduced herself to me and said, "Mike, my name is Amy, Nurse Amy, and I just want to share something with you. When you were in that padded cell and you were coming out of that place, your eyes looked like they were as big as saucers because you looked like you were a cornered animal. You were so terrified." So, that was another manic break, and I've had several in my life. And these days, I am very involved with several different ministries that share that truth, and especially with veterans. I don't know if you can see this, but it says 22 veterans per day, and that represents the number of veterans that commit suicide every day. And I have those as brand awareness for my ministry that I do in modern day here, bringing me up to kind of current events. But there's so much that happened to me before I actually did get through all of my trials. I was placed in 2 different jails. I lived in 2 different homeless shelters in the military, not the military, but in civilian life. When I was going through my manic states, I had been on many psych units. I've been actually institutionalized for 6 weeks after everybody had given up on me out at the state hospital. And what they would do, Andrew, is they would take me from the state hospital once a week to come from there to go back to Fargo, which is 100 miles each direction. And they would say, "Okay, Mike, now we're going to bring you in front of a judge, and you're going to have to be there in chains and ask to be released so you can get your freedoms back." And I was denied 5 weeks in a row before they released me. And when they released me, I wasn't awarded total freedoms. They put me in a second homeless shelter. And the way my life came full circle on the road to redemption is I wound up in the homeless shelter doing nothing one day, just got done having my meal, and in that place where I was at in that shelter, the criminals would be downstairs and the veterans would be in the upper level, but we would eat all of our meals together. So like I said, I just got done eating and came up, and the lady that worked at the shelter said, Mike, you have a couple things of mail here today. So I was thinking to myself, well, who'd be mailing me? I don't have any friends. I don't have anything. And there was two big service checks, a back pay. I got 100% service connection from the military for all the hell I had to endure on Earth. I was that severe with my mental illness. I'm a big mental health advocate these days because of everything I'd gone through in my life, Andrew. And there's so much to share when you read my sample chapters or pick up a copy of the book. If you feel so inclined, I put that at the bottom of the homepage at the Gutter Gospel, where you can open that up into a PDF or EPUB file, and it shares all the trials. And I journaled for over 30 years, and I finally got my autobiography published this past January out at Brooklyn Publishers in New York. So they did an awesome job helping me kind of be a ghostwriting service that really kind of sharpened my edge for the love to write and journal. So that was kind of the end result of all the years spent in the gutter. That's why I titled my book what I did, Gutter Gospel, because I think a lot of people can relate to being in the gutter in life, having nothing, having to endure so much in life, so many trials. I always give out my personal email when I do these podcasts and say, if you feel like you need to go to a therapist, but don't think they really totally understand what it's like to really go through all these trials and tribulations, get a hold of Mike. And that email for you guys is mike@theguttergospel.com. I read those emails every day right before I read my Life Recovery Bible, and I answer those all personally. And that's why I set up a GoFundMe page on my donate tab on my website. If you feel so inclined to donate any amount, that just goes to offsetting the cost to kind of keep my thing going. But well, they're acting up again. Come on in. Sorry about that, those dogs. Anyway, I just feel blessed these days, to have so much. I'll share this with you guys. You'll appreciate this. I've been attending a lot of these men's groups all across the community every day of the week, and a guy from the Saturday group invited me to go to an event last night where they passed out food baskets to needy people, and what a blessing that was. Now I'm going to be a big part of that ministry, helping to get those baskets brought to the distribution center every day, and so they can continue that ministry here in Fargo. And it's not just that, but it's the jail chaplain ministry I'm involved with, where we help people coming out of incarceration that are looking to get back into the community and are looking for something solid to put their teeth into so that they don't wind up as a repeat offender. So several ministries and several trials, and it all gets kind of talked about in the Gutter Gospel, the road to redemption. So
Look at that summary. That's a pretty good intro to share with the audience. And I want to ask you some questions as I read the Gutter Gospel. I really like the first thing you wrote in it was about every life worth living is a story worth telling. I thought that was really,
yes,
really great. And one thing that stood out was your chapter on Born into Chaos. When you read
yeah,
it, when you find out someone's story is going to be about substance use or mental health, you start reading it, but then you're kind of anticipating like when's that part going to hit. But I thought what stood out to me was when you talked about Sauk Center and the financial strain, that those parts of
yeah,
people's stories often get overlooked.
glossed, yeah, glossed
Um,
over.
yeah, that we don't really understand like all those things that happen before then we hear about this and that, and then it all becomes, we got to address the drinking or the substance use, the mental health when, where was that same uh dedication to addressing issues that were happening before that? So I really
Right.
appreciated some of your talk about the financial strain. I think money is an issue that we're not as comfortable talking with people about, but boy, it
Yeah.
impacts us um, significantly. So I thought that stood out really differently about your book compared to others was some of the other things that don't get mentioned. And one that you talked about here that I want to get your feedback on was you did talk about the mania and some manic
Yeah.
episodes, and I really I can't think of a lot of stories or books that actually talk about those as much of yours. And I know there are people experiencing those and going through those,
Right.
but I think it's really hard for people to share about what it's like being to feel the mania, to go through those episodes because a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, don't know how to handle it. But you described some of it in detail. I remember one of them was the genius business plan that you had, was in like
Yeah.
chapter
Yeah.
9. So can you share a little bit more about like why you felt it was so important to share, not just about alcohol use or not just share about mental health, but you actually went into uh, a little bit more talk on mania, which we don't usually hear as many people talk about
Yeah.
with their mental
Well,
health.
yeah. Well, what I'll share, and that's a great question. I've never had that question asked to me before, but I think it shows a few things. It shows the number one, the authenticity of it, and the second thing would be the raw um, uh, clarification on what it's really like to be in those states, and how the people around you, when you are in those states, look at you. They look at you like you're just not normal, and you're scaring the living bejesus out of them because you're spiraling so far out of control that they're terrified to be around you. And that's what had me committed into those civil commitments, and the institutionalization and all the rest of that stuff is because and that's why I thought it had to be in the book. And the chapter I actually liked the most in the book, and I thought the ghostwriters did a good job, a tremendous job bringing it out, was called "The Sea of Tears: The Parable of the Muddy Penny," because what that talks about in there is the redemptive power that we can experience when we kind of come face to face with ourselves and don't see ourselves anymore so much as a worthless muddy penny if we do have mental illness or these challenges in life that I write about and share on these podcasts, but we instead have God that loves us and says to us, you know what, just help one person. Just spend quality time helping one person. And then that person in turn will take another penny, so called, in that chapter and wash it in the sea of tears. And you cry with these people, you laugh with these people, and you share their pain. And what I experienced, Andrew, and the reason I really liked the way it turned out so much was I watched my best friend, Brad Witzke, that I always mention in my podcast, pass away in front of my eyes this past December 14th. And I remember just spoiling Brad. I'd met him at a jail chaplain's event. He was just a tremendous man, a real character, but he had a really good heart. And I fell into a great deep depression for about 2 weeks right after he passed away. And I wrote about that happening and thinking to myself, Brad wouldn't want this for me to just feel sorry for myself and sit around in self pity. He would want me to pick up my life and go on and, you know, give use the talents that God gave you, because we're all born with those, Andrew. Think of it this way. Even a set of identical twins can be as different as night and day, right? So either we have a talent to write or to articulate well or to play sports at a high level, or to play music at a high level, or you name it. We all have some gift or multiple gifts we've been blessed with. And our job while we're here, I believe, is to share those gifts and help out the less fortunate or the people that God brings across your path, because He brings people across my path every day now that really are in need. And I'll share this. I just mentioned this to my wife. I said, you know what? It was such a blessing to go out to that food pantry last night and watch how grateful and thankful those people are to have somebody there to care about them. And there's this little boy that had his mom was carrying a little puppy, and that's, you'll relate this to my little monsters that have been acting up. So I said, well, I have 3 dogs, right? So right away, he just took a shine to me, and he starts talking, well, what's their names? You should have another dog. And I'm like, no, I don't need 4 dogs. I've got 3 already. And they're a lot of trouble. But what I'm trying to say is that it was such a blessing to think how far I've come from being thrown away in life to now just being able to give back to society by writing about my pain and being open and honest about it and crying about it and laughing about it on these podcasts and saying, you know what, guys, Mike's been there. And that's, again, why I like to get my personal email out there to people and say, write to me, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction and get you on the right track in life, because there's a lot of resources for you.
And one of
They
the
weren't there years ago when I was growing up. They weren't there years ago. Like
right.
988, for example, like those type of resources is what I'm talking about. And I put those on my website.
Yeah.
So people can, yeah.
And one of the areas you talked about wanting to help and support is veterans. And there's a
Yeah.
a gentleman I work with who does a lot with gambling recovery for veterans. He does tremendous work. And I think there's my question to you is, like, we hear a lot about veterans, in need of services and in need of help for a lot of things. And I don't think anyone disagrees that there's that need. But then when it comes to the services and the support and the help, there has been quite a big gap in people like
Right.
yourselves. I think of people like him, um, who have this lived experience, and they're offering to tell their stories and do more than that, get involved in things to kind of bridge that gap a little bit closer. Like, how do we make better progress with that? Because it is such a population that deserves the support and the help and the resources, yet we still struggle time and time again with um it not happening. What from your experience and from what you've done, uh what can people take away to think of, like, if I did this or if we could do this, we'd be making that gap a little bit closer. I'm not saying we're going to close it entirely, make it perfect, but how can we just keep that gap shrinking so that more people aren't falling through, especially veterans?
Okay, great question. I'll share this. I was in 3 different treatment centers for veterans, and I think that gap is getting so much farther apart, unfortunately, ever since we had fentanyl introduced into this country in the amounts that it's was coming in at, and because the vulnerability for veterans to be drug users or alcoholics or have mental illness or struggle with this, that, or the other thing is so it's there already. So what I try and do, Andrew, and I hope this answers your question, is I take the time to work. I have a very good contact at the VA here in Fargo, and that's another reason to reach out to me, that I can put people in contact with, because I do it to people all over the country for veterans. And what it is help them get 100% service connection disability rating like I got, so that they have free medical, free dental, almost $4,000 a month in tax-free income, as getting that 100%. That's everything entailed in it, goes towards helping curb the suicide attempts or that rate. And that's a big cause in mine these days. So Aileen McDonough is her name up at the Fargo VA. And I have her contact information that I'd be happy to share with any veteran that reaches out to me in my personal email. And she will put you in touch with your local uh, representative that does the same thing only in your community versus me with her here in Fargo.
Yeah, those connections are so important. And a lot of individuals like yourselves and people I know who specialize in that, like have such deep connections with those types of places and organizations. How do we get better at, because I think it's not a matter of going out and finding veterans. I think a lot of us don't even realize how many people that we may already be working with or how many people we already are serving are veterans. I don't think it's always asked, do you have, are you a veteran or do you have any history? I sometimes think people want to help, but also if they haven't been in that position, if they haven't been a part of it, they feel like there's um
Not quality.
a
Yeah.
disconnection. But to me, like there's veterans all over in the services already that we could do better at identifying them and then bridging. Like I think every one of our clinics that I work at, we should have like a group counseling for veterans, like a group like that. So how do we
Yeah.
like connect with veterans who are already in our care to feel welcome and safe that you can get some help here, that's not always you have to go somewhere else, because we don't always want to just keep saying, hey, go there, go there, go there. Like I think part of it is how can we help them with where they are? Sometimes that's the best place to at least start.
Yeah, that is the best place. Um, I I go back to this because I really think the key that curbs it is they need to have somebody in their life that says, I've been there and I've done it. But even if you haven't served in the military, there's so many hurting people in the world now that aren't veterans that I kind of cast a broader net in my ministry these days because people, you look at the suicide rates in this country now, they're just off the charts with people with mental illness. And like I just said, it's not just the veterans, it's everybody. And that's why I try and get out there as much as possible. I'll share this with you. I hope I'm not getting off your question here, but I uh, I just started to begin the very infant steps of starting my own podcast as a host. I just
Congrats.
started that last night in the middle of the night because I think what we need to do is to reach that broader audience. And I'm so excited because tomorrow, what's happening is I'm actually being interviewed on a podcast that is broadcast in 5 continents in over 83 countries and has almost 3 million listeners per episode. And so I'm called, I believe, these days to reach out to not just veterans, like I said, but to all the hurting people in this world. Ever since Adam and Eve, we've had Cain, Kill, and Abel, and we've had it all. And it's just part of the experience living in a fallen world, and we just have to show more compassion towards your neighbor or veteran or non-veteran and say, hey, how can I help you out here? Like I'll just share this with you. I was in a small men's group and I said, well, I've got a really bad back because I had to lift pianos and do all this other stuff growing up to make ends meet. And I said, I can't shovel my sidewalk. And if somebody could help, and this one guy raises his hand right away and he goes, well, I happen to have a shovel in my car, Mike, so I'll come over and take care of her right away. I go, well, I got to pay you something, right? And he goes, well, we'll work that out. So he comes over and he's a big NDSU football fan, right? And he had on his NDSU sweatshirt, but and the game was about to start after the men's group is the point I'm going to make here. And anyway, he So he shovels it off real quick, and then he sends me a text and says Merry Christmas. He doesn't want any money for it. It's just simple things like that, that really go a long way to have people say, you know what, maybe I do have more faith in humanity these days, because a small gesture like that really brings your connection to veterans and non-veterans alike to say, isn't it awesome that there's somebody like this around that has challenges in life as well, but is going out of their way to do something nice and just as a blessing to somebody else.
Yeah, I think sometimes
That's why I love that food pantry. That's why I love that food pantry experience last night so much, because those people, I tell you what, they were so grateful for just a little bit of food they could get to last them a week until they're back the next week. And you talk about a humbling experience and experiencing firsthand what gratitude's like. That's gratitude firsthand. There's people in there, little kids just giving you hugs and high fives. And it's just like, man, I tell you what, that's better than any chemical high you can ever experience. Because trust me, I've had a lot of them, and say, you know what, that's what it's all about, giving back in small ways in your community, getting out and being involved in small groups and saying, you know what, I have my flaws, I've had my past, but the good thing about it that I always like to say in these podcasts is that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. No one's perfect, and we are here to have learned our lessons, hopefully, to say, let's help out our fellow man in what we've learned in our journey.
Yeah, I think sometimes I like how you put it, where it's sometimes our fear or thinking that we can't build this perfect connection leads us to not taking any little steps.
Steps.
So, if I don't have that experience of a veteran, oh, I can't connect with them. So like then it's a uh we avoid doing that or don't do anything, versus like the simple things about being able to connect is what sometimes helps build stronger connections, or helps to be able to um go forward. So I think that's really important to think about, because we need those who aren't veterans to step in and help out too, for all the
Right.
resources and support that's needed. So um, I really appreciate that that side of it. Um, before we get to like a final takeaway from you, you do mention in your book what you call grow, GROW. Can you tell just listeners a little bit about like your grow, which is like your approach that you kind of outline?
Yeah. Growth basically is an acronym where it stands for God, got to put him first. Uh, R for recovery, because if you're not in recovery, it's hard to grow, right? O for others. Uh, um, I'm drawing a blank. I forget what the growth was on the T and the H. But anyway, it's in the book. How about that? I'm not saying that as a cop out. I forgot what it was. It's been so long ago that I wrote it. But anyway, I'll share this with you. You'll appreciate this as a takeaway, guys, that happened to me as a direct result of last night at that food pantry. I was scheduled to go to something known as the ICVM Storytellers Conference in Orlando, Florida, to pitch my autobiography to see if it could get turned into a true life movie. And what happened was I came home last night after being out there for a couple hours and having that experience to say, you know what? I'm not going to that conference, because I'm going to use that money to go out and buy gift cards for these people that are so hurting at that pantry, because I don't believe I'm being called to be in movies about my life or anything else after seeing people that really are hurting and that kind of need. that money can be spent a lot better ways than me getting on a plane and going and flying to Orlando for 5 days. So
Wow.
there's a good takeaway for you. If we can have that kind of compassion towards people by getting out in the community, we can all serve at a food pantry or the Salvation Army or you name it. There's so many opportunities in the communities that are just dying for volunteers, and that will give you a proper perspective on what you're really put on this planet for. Because if you look at it as taking the opposite approach and doing as many drugs or drinking or you name it, look at where that leaves people that have taken it to the extreme. They wind up dead young or taking their own life, or it snowballs downhill. So get out in your community and serve others. That would be my big takeaway, is to say, be involved to hurting people. They need you.
And a simple step that can be done right away, not requiring
Yeah.
a significant amount of action, not something that we have to say, well, let's see when this happens and I can do that, but that's something that anyone can do pretty quickly and have a impact on some people. So I do appreciate
And the
that.
rewards are exponential. You can just have the time of your life hanging out there and talking to people that are hurting. You know what I had been asked to go to that thing, Andrew, for almost a month by this friend of mine. And I kept putting him off, saying, well, I got a really bad back and I blew out my right deltoid, which is true. So how much help could I be? I kept using that as my excuse, right? But what I was really doing was saying I would rather sit by myself and watch football or do something else in a selfish manner that didn't involve me getting out there and going through that experience. But now that I have, I'm feeling called to take it up a notch and help as many of those people as I can. So that would be my rah cheer for your listening audiences, to say, do the same thing, get out there and just look at how blessed you will be in return for doing the little things to help somebody bridge that gap.
That's great. Really appreciate you sharing that. And really thanks for taking the time to talk with us. Your book, The Gutter Gospel: Road to Redemption. And people can also visit your website, which is theguttergospel.com, and learn more about. You've got some resources out there. You've got some sample chapters if people want to give a read before getting the book officially. So we'll make sure our audience members have all those links to connect with you, learn more about you. And you heard it, folks. He said email him if you want to talk with him or learn more. So Mike Smith, can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and sharing all your experience with us.
Well, again, Andrew, I really want to take time out to thank you, because I'm grateful to everybody that messages me and says, hey, Mike, I'd love to have you on my show. And it's, tomorrow, like I shared, it's going to be a massive audience, but that's not what it's about. It's about just trying to connect as many people around the world as I can and give it all back and say, you know what, that's what it's all about. Give until it hurts, because you can't outgive God. So look at it that way. You can't outgive God, right? He owns it all, and he put us all here. So love on people, man. Get out there and get involved.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. And we will look forward to audience members listening to your other talks, your reading your book and visiting your website, and appreciate everything you're doing.
Yes, sir, Andrew. Thank you again.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com. And connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.